It appears wealthy bloodlines have been disguising ecological attacks with natural resource development projects and other industrial activities. Their industrial projects serve as a Trojan horse for unconventional warfare. The methods that they use to intentionally destroy the environment with toxic industrial materials include pipeline construction and spills, hydraulic fracturing, explosions, conventional oil drilling, mining, ocean tanker and rig spills, nuclear tests and catastrophes, train and vehicular accidents involving TIMs. You may notice that this list includes much of the same infrastructure, toxic industrial materials, and IDDs that official sources recognize as elements of non-traditional, see Bernie threats that were described in the previous chapter. Other state-sponsored methods for wide-scale environmental destruction that are not related to industrial activity include stratospheric aerosol injection and wide-range arson. International treaties exist that forbid the willful mass destruction of the environment. While some may argue that these treaties are inapplicable in this situation, I think there's an understanding that you do not implement a global protocol of natural resource demolishment, resulting in mass disease and famine. However, by camouflaging their invasions with industrial projects, they can achieve the following: attack zones that are normally off-limits to conventional armed forces. They can sneak these weapons systems into populated civilian zones and indigenous territories. They can stealthily invade ostensibly sovereign nations without drawing the same public attention as a conventional offense. This approach allows them to bypass some of the rules that prevent the extensive planned destruction of the environment and displacement of a community, as well as those that prohibit the gradual mass murder of civilians through starvation and disease. They can reduce at least some international criticism by employing this cloaked procedure. This type of invasion lowers the guard of the targeted community. There's already dynamic opposition to some of their extractive projects. Yet, if the host community knew that this was a calculated strategy to displace them, if they understood that they were chosen for cultural, social, economical, and biological annihilation by a criminal network, then resistance to these projects would be more vigorous. Regarding the multifaceted nature of these invasions, some characteristics that I've noticed include colonization, pre-invasion softening up, division strategies, social, cultural, and psychological wreckage, non-lethal weapons and Bernie combination, economical ruin, disease and death, ecological destruction. Industries like pipeline construction, mining, logging, and oil and gas, that includes conventional oil drilling and fracking, rely mostly on non-local workers for their projects. These workers are usually young men from different states or countries They are well-paid transient workers with no connection to what has been referred to as the host community. I call it the targeted community. These industrial workers are outsiders. Depending on the project, hundreds or thousands of them may be deployed to the project area. In some cases, these workers substantially outnumber the residents of a targeted community. Some refer to this influx of non-residents as a colonization. This legion of industrial workers who have no ties to the targeted community congregate in what has been called man camps, also known as industrial or work camps. A pattern has unfolded internationally. There's a correlation between these man camps and unhealthy phenomena within the targeted and surrounding communities. This includes a surge in missing and murdered women and children, fatal accidents, prostitution, expansion of violent crime, co-optation of locals in corruption, domestic disputes, rise in harmful drug use, and other social vices. In summary, these man camps bring a profusion of violence and crime to the host and surrounding communities. During the gate opening phase, extractive corporations run pacification and divide and conquer operations. Industrial corporations regularly spend millions of dollars to obtain what's known as the social license, that is, permission to let them in. During this phase, they soften up the targeted community with payouts and pledges. They buy off leaders within the targeted community and furnish other residents with gifts. They will make donations to local school boards, veteran groups, college scholarships, and food banks, as well as universities, museums, hospitals, and other charities. Guarantees are made by these corporations that there will be new jobs and other improvements. While some promises are kept, others are not. This gift-giving tactic appears to work rather well as a pacifier, and its use by extractive industries goes back at least a half a century. When Texaco descended from helicopters into the Ecuadorian Amazon in the early 1960s, they gave the indigenous people gifts before carrying out cultural and biological genocide, using crude oil as an improvised sea-burning agent. They will also resort to academia in an attempt to sell the public on the deal. Compromised academics with links to the industry have used bogus data to convince the host community and general population that extractive projects are necessary and safe. Some have presented misleading evidence to support ruinous projects in sensitive areas. Both fracking and mining corporations are notorious for creating deep division within the communities that they are invading. Divide and conquer, also known as divide and rule, is a military strategy that goes back to ancient Greece. This was regularly used by soldiers in ancient Rome. Basically, it's the creation of infighting among a population being invaded. The rationale is that a fragmented community is easier to conquer than a united one. These corporations have been known to provoke social chaos and violence within the community that they have in their crosshairs. The fragmentation that they instigate within the targeted community even divides some families. Psychological operations have reportedly been used against fracking resistors, who are considered insurgents. Extractive projects all over the world have caused the following: disappearance of traditional knowledge, threats to the continuation of communities and entire cultures, loss of homes followed by displacement, impairment of agricultural land, destruction of cultural sites, landscape degradation, biodiversity decline, pollution of the environment on which livelihoods and culture depend, harmful effects on self-sustainability, loss of traditional livelihoods and economy, increased unemployment, rise in violent crime, social and cultural breakup, corruption, and vices. So it appears that as part of the social and economical walloping, various forms of malignance are pitched into the targeted community. In addition to chemical attack, I've noticed other types of obscure weapons being used, including those recognized as non-lethal weapons by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and U.S. Department of Defense. These weapons, that I'll explain in more detail in Chapter 10, include bright lights, herbicides such as defoliants, bad smells, noise, and visual commotion. It appears to me that these audiovisual disturbances are intended to render zones off limits by stressing people and wildlife. So these attacks are used in conjunction with the chemical munitions that were described in the chapter on modern ecological warfare that will also be explained in more detail in chapters 10 through 14. The communities that are wrecked by these attacks are often healthy before the event, even if they were not economically prosperous. The affected ones had their own functional and even thriving local economies. Most importantly, they had real wealth, that is, unspoiled natural resources, agricultural land that provided ample food, pristine water reservoirs with plenty of fresh fish, and clean air. The zones they inhabited were blooming with life. Residents described them as a paradise. Some consistent post-attack effects that I've noticed include thorough pollution of air, soil, water, and vegetation, livestock and wildlife sickness and death, human disease and mortality, displacement, tourism disruption, dissolution of local economy, crime increases, property value decline, weakening of community social bonds, cultural depletion. The obvious intention of these clandestine attacks is to environmentally, biologically, economically, psychologically, socially, and culturally annihilate the targeted community.